Alright, let me just get this out of the way from the beginning. Joss Whedon is not a good person. In this video, I'm going to say nice things about his movies. That does not mean I endorse his behavior in any way, shape, or form. Realistically speaking, he's not even the only director I'll be covering in this series that statement applies to. But he is the only one that I know for sure that statement applies to. I hope that you would all understand this without me having to say anything, but nuance is difficult for a lot of people on the internet. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually start talking about his movies. The film Serenity is a conclusion to the TV show Firefly, which failed to gain an audience after the network chose poor time slots for airing, left 3 episodes unaired, and aired the remaining episodes out of order, including saving the 2-part pilot for the end of the season's run. Despite this, it would gain a cult following shortly after being canceled by Fox. Without any follow-up seasons, Joss Whedon decided to wrap up the last 6 years of his 7-year plan into a single film, and while that massive shift in pacing can be a bit jarring at the start, it's pretty easy to settle into. Despite the fact that this film builds on characters and plot points from the show, it still would work pretty well as a standalone story, though I imagine some of the emotional beats would not hit in the same way without already being invested in these characters. Ultimately, this film serves very well as a finale to a show that was cut off way too soon.
River?
I swallowed a bug.
Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog was originally released online as a 3-part miniseries. However, due to the nature of each episode serving as a single act of the larger story, and the fact that later releases edited them together, I am going to once again invoke the Moana 2 principle and treat this as a film. Additionally, while Dr. Horrible's runtime barely qualifies it as a feature film, it does still qualify. This is likely the furthest stretch you'll see me make to count something as a film in this series. As for the content of the film, it is full of catchy songs that I regularly keep in my listening rotation, even 7 years after I first saw it.
It's a brand new day, and the sun is high. All the birds are singing that you're gonna die.
As well as charming performances from all 3 members of the main cast. It is, however, stooped in that late 2000s internet nerd culture that does date itself at times. While this works for the performances, it could certainly be off-putting to some.
I hate the homeless and this problem that plagues our city.
The first Avengers movie came out when I was 12 years old, and as a kid, I would watch it on repeat. Now, as an adult who just logged it for the 15th time on my Letterboxd account, not much has changed, I am able to properly appreciate why it captivates me so well, even in a time when the MCU has raised its stakes tenfold from this point, and all the other studios are trying to cobble together their own cinematic universes. The 2 main things that help the first Avengers movie still hold up are the fantastic script and the well-rounded characters. Every member of the team feels completely distinct from each other, something that can get a little lost once there's 20-something superheroes to balance instead of 6. They also all get their moments to shine that complement and further develop the character arcs that we've already seen begin in the previous films, with the exception of Hawkeye, who only has 30 seconds of screen time in an earlier movie and spends half of this one mind-controlled. As someone who is still a massive fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, despite the dwindling support from the larger fan base, I will always appreciate what this film accomplished for one of my favorite movie franchises.
I recognize the council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it.
Joss Whedon's iteration of Much Ado About Nothing feels pretty hollow most of the time. The modern setting and black and white coloration feel like choices that were made just to keep production costs low, as opposed to having any real creative inspiration behind them. On top of that, the performances do a poor job of highlighting the humor in the script, though notable exceptions are the moments where Benedict and Beatrice are eavesdropping, as well as Nathan Fillion's entire performance as Dogberry. He doesn't ham it up quite as much as Michael Keaton did in Branagh's version, but he's still a delight.
But, masters, remember that I am an ass, though it be not written down, yet forget not that I am an ass.
Age of Ultron is a much, much weaker conclusion to Phase 2 of the MCU than the first Avengers film was to Phase 1. It is much more concerned with setting up the rest of the Infinity Saga than it is telling its own story, which results in a poor adaptation of Ultron as a character, and several scenes that have little to no bearing on the plot at hand. Additionally, it makes several character choices that are absolutely wild, especially with Pietro and Wanda, two characters who, in the comics, are Magneto's Romani children. Yet, in this film, they are played by white people and volunteer to undergo experiments at the hands of Hydra, a decision that the franchise has still struggled to grapple with the implications of.
Quick question. Your reaction to the bombing of your civilian apartment building and the murder of your parents was to join an anti-freedom terrorist organization.
We wanted to change the world.
This is also the point where we can start to see Joss Whedon's style almost become a Flanderization of itself. His writing starts to rely more and more on corny jokes and one-liners that have way too much presence in this film and become really annoying. He's also just straight up misogynistic in the way he writes part of Natasha's backstory here. That's not to say the film is completely awful. When it slows down to actually try to be its own movie instead of a coming soon reel, it has fun character moments, particularly the party scene with the Avengers all gathering around trying to lift Mjolnir. And while I never used to care for Clint's family in this film, the Hawkeye series somehow managed to make me like them enough that it became retroactive, though I feel that that's more in spite of this movie and not because of it.
Well, he's definitely unhappy. I'm gonna try and keep him that way.
You're not a match for him, Cap.
Thanks, Barton.
Hey, wait a minute. Okay, I assume most people who are watching this video already understand why I'd review a movie that only credits Zack Snyder as a director, but just in case, I'll go over it real quick. In 2013, Warner Bros. Releases Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder. The movie does well financially, and Warner, desperate to achieve the success of the Avengers from the year prior, decides it will be a launching point for a DC Comics cinematic universe. Warner Bros., however, doesn't understand the slow build-up that Marvel used to that point, and instead scraps Zack Snyder's actual plans for a Man of Steel sequel to rush him into making Batman v Superman and Justice League back-to-back. Then, Batman v Superman comes out, and does well financially, but has terrible critic reception, with the darker tone being a common complaint. Uh-oh, Warner Brothers says, but Zack's already well underway with his Justice League movie, and now we're afraid people won't want to see it. Then, with only 6 months left until the film's scheduled release, Zack Snyder steps away from the film to deal with a personal tragedy that I won't get into in this video. From here, Warner Brothers takes advantage of this situation and hires Joss Whedon to complete the film, obviously hoping to capture some of his Avengers magic. His job is now to cut the film down to 2 hours and completely change the tone by reshooting half of it and Frankensteining the other half around a new script. In 6 months, because they don't want to delay release. So, even though he did not receive a co-director credit on the film, Justice League absolutely belongs on a Joss Whedon ranking. And yeah, when you take all that into account, it makes complete sense why this film turned out the way it did. It's a very obvious product of two directors' competing visions with a healthy backdrop of major studio interference. It's so easy to tell which shots were filmed by which director.
You're out of your mind, Bruce Wayne.
And now that Zack Snyder was given the opportunity to go back and complete his version of the film, it's so much more obvious just how much was changed by Whedon and Warner Brothers. There are plenty of videos out there already doing direct scene-to-scene comparisons, so I'll leave that alone and just focus on the major changes. It's a choice to add this random civilian family that contributes nothing to the plot and barely interacts with the main characters. It's a choice to use the limited time and budget you have to shoot entirely new scenes that serve the same function as scenes Snyder already shot for you. And it's certainly a choice to remove even the smallest mention of Darkseid from this film and pretend like Steppenwolf is somehow a serviceable main villain here, especially after changing his design to make him 10 times less threatening. But the most egregious thing this movie does is remove Cyborg's backstory. Easily, the most compelling part of Snyder's film has been stripped away completely. And at this point, I realize I'm running the risk of sounding like a Snyder cultist, so let me just say that while the Snyder Cut is a better film overall, not every change made in Justice League is a bad one. I like the Just Save One scene between Batman and Flash. It justifies placing Batman as the leader of this team over, say, Wonder Woman, who feels more like she's being snubbed of that role in the Snyder Cut. Plus, it's a nice bit of character growth from this version of Batman, who has been established to have become bitter after the loss of Robin. I also like the scene where Aquaman sits on the lasso of truth. It's a nice moment of vulnerability from a character who's been putting up a stoic persona up to this point, and showcases the team getting closer, even if it is involuntary. The biggest change to have a positive impact on this version of the film, though, is Superman. Snyder has never understood Superman as a character. In Man of Steel, he has him deliberately lead fights into crowded areas and aura farm his way around an exploding gas truck instead of, I don't know, stopping it from hitting this building that probably has people inside. In Batman v Superman, he literally has Superman, the symbol of all that is good in the DC universe, say,
"No one stays good in this world."
These problems are also present in the Snyder Cut to a lesser extent, though his limited screen time prevents it from becoming overbearing. In this version of the film, though, he actually feels like the symbol of hope and optimism that he's supposed to be.
You're all too weak to see the truth.
Well, I believe in truth. But I'm also a big fan of justice.
This is easily the best iteration of Henry Cavill's Superman to watch. Let me rephrase that. This is the best material Henry Cavill was given to work with as this character.
How did you get the house back from the bank?
I bought the bank.
I just find it funny that Joss Whedon made his first film because he got screwed over by a studio, and then he made his last film because he was being used by a studio to screw over another artist. Anyway, with an average of 3 stars even, Joss Whedon sits right in the middle of our directors between Favreau and Branagh. In 2020, Ray Fisher, who plays Cyborg in Justice League, blew the whistle on abuse he received from the director during the film's reshoots. This opened the door for other actors who had worked with Whedon before but were too afraid to speak up to recount the abuse they also received from him. Warner Brothers launched their own investigation and found that Joss Whedon had indeed been abusive towards cast on the Justice League set, hence the warning I gave at the beginning of this video. HBO subsequently removed Joss Whedon's name from all marketing for The Nevers, the TV show he was working on at the time, and that's the last I've heard about any projects from him. Hopefully he doesn't turn heel and become a right-wing grifter like so many other sexual abusers do when they're exposed. If that happened, he might be liable to make a movie for the Daily Wire or something, and then I'd have to watch it. Ugh. Alright, I don't want to think about that anymore. I'm running out of interesting ways to tease the next director, but it's going to be Shane Black.